You guys, welcome to another episode of Soft Rebellion. My name is Ntatu, and thank you so much for joining me. So today I wanted to delve deep into my journey to finding the love of my life. I've spoken or even alluded to the fact that I'm openly talking about this journey on TikTok, and I wanted to bring this on this platform and really explore without the pressures of a trending audio or my ideas being misconstrued. But just to give you context, I'm a 31-year-old woman, been in two relationships in my life, one that lasted for 4 years and the other for 5 months. And it's always interesting mentioning the 5 months because, it's short-lived and yet it's had such an imprint in my life. I've got a decent career. I've pivoted quite a bit, but I'd say I'm comfortable for the most part. I'm established in who I am and what I want or am pursuing. I'd also say I'm comfortable financially. I live in an apartment, a 1-bedroom apartment, gorgeous place. That's where I'm at. But I've realized a couple of years ago that I want romantic partnership, but the idea of a partnership I want is unlike anything I've experienced before. I think for the longest time, I've always been scared of pursuing romantic relationships. I used to run. Literally. I used to run and my body would just react like I was in danger, at the prospect of a relationship because I was taught that I should run away from boys, literally in those words. I must stay away from boys, run away from them. It was something wrong. And I know a lot of us in South Africa were taught this, but somehow for me it really did translate into something that I perceived as a threat. I don't know relationships that worked well growing up. Like all the relationships I know, either men or women were unhappy. There was some dysfunction or the other. If people didn't break up or divorce altogether. I didn't grow up with both my mom and dad in one household, so I can't even say that I know relationships from that context. The best representation I had was later on in life when I went to church and I saw couples. But I also think growing up then exposed me to some of the dysfunction that I may not have been privy to at the time, which made me, think differently about my pursuit of relationships. I'm very intentional about it. As you'll come to learn, I don't think relationships are something that happen passively to us. I think we can be willing, intentional participants in them. I am an active participant in my pursuit for relationships. So the two opposing sides that I've often, encountered when I share about this journey is, on the one side, you find educated, smart, well-off women, often feminist, telling me that the pursuit is beneath me, that I don't need a man, which I don't, that it's only going to, I don't know, it's gonna dumb me down. Do you know what I mean? Because romantic relationships with men specifically, are known to be where women go to die. And it's not a view that I necessarily disagree with. We've seen powerful women face their demise at the hands of men. And I'm refusing to mention really big names, but we've seen how Naomi Osaka, for instance, and her boyfriend was affected in her career by the partner that she chose and had a child with. We've seen Sierra almost facing the same results. And these are big, names that I'm mentioning in media, but there's so many other women who've made this end, even in the South African context. I dare even say Dr. Nandipa, for instance, who fell in love with a criminal and a rapist and a murderer. And her career came to a standstill, and her personal life was upheaved because of a man, you know. And then on the other side, we see women and men questioning the fact that, hey, I've pursued all this knowledge, I'm independent in thought, or rather, my ideas are opposing to what we've been taught, and therefore make me less desirable as a romantic partner. My education, the fact that I work, and I'm financially independent, you know, and my views and how I express myself basically make me less desirable as a romantic partner. I suspect because I'm not malleable to control or men's manipulation, but it's always framed as I'm too masculine, you know, and I suppose here masculinity is interpreted as men's ability to provide. And now that I can do that for myself, then I'll have less respect or want to make decisions without any regard for their male partner. You know, that's my assessment of the situation. And neither side appeals to me, right? Because I think, yes, in the past, women have entered relationships for their survival and they've depended on men financially for their well-being. I'm not there. I'm not in a position where I'd say I need a man for my survival. I can survive and I can meet my needs, everyday needs and wants, and, you know, a bit more than that. But at the same time, I do recognize my need for, not a need, but a desire for partnership, you know. Excuse me. The fact that my career, I've got hobbies and interests outside of my professional life. I've got really good friendships with, you know, the people in my life. I've invested in all these other relationships in my life, which do fulfill me, but there's this other aspect that they're not able to match. And I don't see that as a weakness. I don't see that as something that, yes, it could potentially lead to my doom only if I'm just passive in it and I'm not exercising my own discretion, you know. And I think despite the risks of being in a potential relationship, I do still want that partnership. And it's something that I am actively pursuing. You know what I mean? I also think the desire for partnership is not unnatural, you know. Like, I think we haven't evolved past the want or the desire for partnership, because not long ago we existed in community, you know. As humans, we existed in settings where we lived with our parents, our grandparents, our cousins and siblings, and very close to others in the community, you know. Not just our relatives, but the other people we coexisted with in the tribe, and we were in fellowship with those people. We shared our lives with them, and yet now I'm isolated. I think about the fact that I'm in my apartment, this apartment that I love and have worked hard for. I've decorated it beautifully, but I've been in this apartment all day, hardly spoke to anyone, haven't spoken to a single person other than a phone call I had with a friend earlier. And I don't think that's natural. It's not a coincidence that the loneliness statistics are on the rise, you know. And I'm lucky that I actually enjoy deep friendships with my people and I can open up about where I'm at. I don't think there's anything off limits, right? Even though it's hard being vulnerable sometimes, but I enjoy close relationships with the people in my life. But I still can't say any of that will replace, you know, the desire for romantic partnership. And I think societies have shifted so much to how we existed before that our brains haven't yet evolved to not want partnership. And I refuse to be shamed for wanting the same or even speaking out about wanting it. And what I've come to learn actually is that so many of us, so many people have the same desires, but they just aren't prepared to speak about them honestly in public because it's shameful. You know, it's almost seen as if you're weak if you want this thing despite everything that's going well in your life. Like, I've got friends who are even trivializing their desire for partnership when we talk to each other, and it's like, it's nothing to be ashamed about. It's it's absolutely nothing to be ashamed about. I think what would be a shame is us pretending like we don't need people, we don't need to coexist with people or create our lives with people, and then fall into these situations that make us worse than we are right now. I think I've seen people who settle just because they want the kind of partnership that they can have with a male part. I'm saying partnership a lot, and it's irking me. But what I'm saying is, I've seen people settle for less than they deserve because their desire for partnership has made them settle, because it's not something they can openly talk about, and even, almost theorize with their friends about whether or not this person is exactly suited for them. They aren't able to have those honest conversations before they enter into these relationships, and when they do, they aren't even able to have honest conversations about some of the assumptions they've made about this person, and the fact that now they've changed their mind, or this is not the fantasy that they were hoping would be. I just think being dishonest or being shamed for your desires doesn't create a space where you can honestly reflect on the kind of situation you find yourself and therefore make better decisions. And I think that's why I publicly talk about this, because I'm able to be honest when something is not what I want, even though I do know that I want a partner. But I'm not going to settle down just because someone is a man and they say they want partnership with me. There's still certain qualities that I look for. I still want, a partner who's properly suited for me, because, I did, speak about the fact that earlier, I'm this person who really enjoys knowledge and learning, and I want to still pursue knowledge and learning and be autonomous in my relationship without feeling like a man's sense of identity as a man is threatened, or that I'm not submissive as a wife, or whatever ideals we've got about what relationships are supposed to be. I think I do see romantic relationships for me as an experience that is meant to be enriching, that is meant to be pleasurable, and one where we can both get what we can't individually, something that we can learn from and grow, and it be beautiful. I haven't seen a blueprint of that yet, and I am hoping that it's going to be an experience that we co-create. But if we're only focused on what our gender roles are supposed to be and how society perceives us, then I think that experience is limited, and we can never get to a point where we self-actualize in those relationships, because we concern ourselves about the societal norms and standards and how they affect the interpretation of this union, So I think my relationship is going to be very unique to me. And my person is gonna be, it's just gonna make sense. Right? But I also don't think it's something that's gonna happen coincidentally. I think it's something that we will actively have to make ourselves. So when we focus on the shame around wanting this thing, and the fact that it seems desperate, or it seems like we shouldn't act like we care type thing, it limits any room for us to question, to theorize with our friends and ask questions and, dissect if this is right, or this kind of behavior is acceptable, or, and I see how some of my friends have also almost acted as if they're not affected by this, even though they are, even though they do want, to a point where you find someone being in a relationship and deep down that it's not right for them, but because they've decided to make this decision, you can no longer make statements about whether or not it's right for them. You just need to let people, live out their truth and live out with the consequences of their decisions. But I really think if we were honest as a society and spoke about this openly, then we could reduce, chances of falling into this thing that we all want, or most of us want, but are too afraid to open up about it anyway. So just in closing, because this is getting longer than I want it to be, I think I just refuse to fall on either side. Like, I refuse to not pursue this thing because I'm scared of what people are gonna say, or I'm shamed into, not pursuing the thing. But I also refuse to mold myself just to appeal to the male gaze, just to appear to be seductive or appealing to a potential romantic partner. Like, I'm not interested in performing for romantic relationships. I'm not interested in playing a role. I really want to exist in my fullness, in my flaws. Obviously, also actively learning and improving myself. I think part of the learnings from being an active participant in seeking romantic partnership is the self-awareness. I'm very aware about what my shortcomings are, and I'm actively working on bettering those for my relationship, learning effective communication. These are skills I wasn't always adept in, and ones that I've identified as being important in a relationship. And that's why I don't think, love or relationships are just this mystical thing that happens to us. It's one that we have to cultivate. And as with anything that we want to be better in, we do have to invest time and effort improving and learning and, getting the right tools for it. And I think it's that too. And maybe it removes the romance or the fantasy that we've created around romantic relationships. But I think most of that is tied to us seeing men as people to save us, men as saviors to come and like sweep you off your feet, and in this romantic fantastical world. And that's not something I believe in. Like, for me, I really think safety is important. Psychological safety is important, with the potential partner. As someone who is anxious and easily spirals, it's important to have that psychological safety. And part of that is through conversations, honest, open conversations. And I don't see relationships as, firstly, men have never saved anyone. I don't think men can save, us or anyone really. Like, you need to save yourself. And this sounds so cliche because when I also talk about wanting a relationship, people would say, decenter men, rather focus all that time and attention on your friends, family, and career interests and whatnot. And I'm like, I've done all of that, and I am still doing that. But the desire for partnership is something entirely separate from all these other relationships I have in my life, right? But back to my point about men and being saviors, I think that idea comes from when women weren't capable of working for their own money. Not necessarily capable, but we're not allowed to be independent financially and in thought. They weren't allowed to pursue knowledge for the sake of it, right? And society really was structured in such a way that we depended on men for our livelihoods. And I think there's still an element of that left in our society where we think our men will save us, even though we've come such a long way in terms of working and whatnot. There's still an aspect, at least romantically, that we expect men to save us. I don't know from what. Maybe from the weight of the world and how heavy it all is sometimes, even our jobs can be so overwhelming, and existing in society feels overwhelming sometimes. And it's like, oh, I'm just a small human in this vast universe. And the weight of that realization can just be so, so enormous that maybe then the idea of a romantic relationship is what will anchor you, or makes it less daunting, because you're facing the world with someone. It's you two against the world type of situation. And that's nice and all, but I don't think my idea of a relationship is one of a savior. It's, guys, I wish I could articulate the blueprint of relationship that I've got. Like, it's beautiful in my mind. And I'm really not prepared to settle for anything less than that, because I refuse to enter into a relationship only for me to go die in it. If it's not something that inspires me to be better, to be the best version of myself, to be happier than I currently am alone, then I don't want it, I don't want to find myself having settled for this person only to regret it later down the line, and I don't think I have many regrets in my life, but yeah, one regret, in fact, I had talked about this. I suppose this is a full circle moment. I talked about being in a 5-month relationship and a 4-year long one. The 4 years, that was my decision. I think I was very clear about what that relationship was going into it, even though when it ended and the circumstances under which it ended, there was no regrets. There was never a point where I said, oh, I regret ever being with this person. But with the 5-month long relationship, there were certainly regrets there. And I think one of my biggest regrets is that emotionally I was not okay. And I found myself doing things or allowing certain behaviors that under normal circumstances I'd never, ever, ever allow. And I think that was my first encounter with realizing that people can be cruel for the sake of it, and that our brains actually adapt to some of those circumstances if they happen long enough, to a point where you even excuse wrong behavior as right, or you don't see them as wrong anymore because they've happened so many times. So after that encounter, I was very deliberate about making sure that I'm lucid when I make decisions about the kind of partner that I want. And I suppose I'm inviting you guys to also be, active participants in choosing your partner, to not be wait to be chosen, but also make sure that you are making the decision, in terms of the type of person you want to end up with. You don't just wait for people to pursue you. You ask the right questions, you get to decide that actually you're not the type of person I want. I'm going to wait a little longer to find what I'm looking for, as opposed to automatically fall into this relationship that doesn't even serve you, or one that chips away at the bright, colorful spots that make you uniquely you. So I think my invitation for your act of rebellion today is that, hey, be honest about what it is that you want, even if people shame you for it, or even if some don't understand, but live your truth, and more than that, be active in making the life that you want. Don't just wait, because you're going to wait forever. And unfortunately, life is not how it used to be anymore. Like I said, I've been in my apartment all day, haven't seen anyone, not even my neighbors. So the chances of meeting the kind of people that we want are very slim. So be active, and don't be a helpless participant. Don't be a helpless bystander in your own life. Be an active participant, and make sure that like you make decisions too, the decisions that you can live with. And yeah, thank you so much, guys, for joining me. I hope to see you at the next episode where I explore this journey a bit more. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.